collided, imploded again, consumed by the dark dimension, overloaded with searing heat, eaten alive by the Power Stone, cursed to a frozen prison. Today, we're ranking every Marvel Cinematic Universe villain fate gruesome to most gruesome. Like usual, we're going to begin with the characters who didn't really get the comic book beatdown you might have come to the theater for. These guys got off easy. First up is the main villain of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Namor. Or Namor, whatever you want.
But my enemies call me Namor.
This guy is proof that a villain can have a sympathetic backstory and still be completely despicable. His frustration at the inhumane treatment of slaves was completely understandable, but then it devolved into him wanting to wage war against the entire world, and he hoped to drag Wakanda with him into it. When they refused, he decided to instead drag them into a giant flood, effectively drowning Shuri's mother right in front of her, and killing countless others in the process. He then has the audacity to tell her she has 1 week to mourn her losses before he comes back to either recruit her armies or kill them trying.
You are queen now.
What makes Namor's defeat so infuriating is that he was so close to having one of the most deservedly gruesome deaths in the MCU. The guy was deprived of oxygen throughout his fight with Shuri and was hit point blank with an explosion, not to mention how Shuri survived getting stabbed through the stomach to stop him from getting to the water. Considering how he unapologetically killed probably hundreds of people and let Wakanda take the heat for his crimes, this death would have been a fitting end for him. But fortunately for him, Shuri didn't just spare his life. She offered to protect him and his people from the outside world, assuring them that they'd never be attacked for their adamantium. While he got the crap beaten out of him, Namor still got off with a net positive. And while this was a fitting conclusion to Shuri's story arc throughout the movie, we can't deny we felt annoyed seeing the literal mass-murdering terrorists get off completely scot-free. Adding one more to the scot-free pile, next up is Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp. The key difference between Ghost and Namor was that while both of them lashed out at the world because of how they were treated, Ghost was also personally constantly tormented by unspeakable pain after her time in the quantum realm.
It hurts. It always hurts.
It's hard to blame her for doing literally anything, even as much as attempted murder, to heal her wounds. Not impossible, mind you, but it is hard. Thankfully for her, she was healed temporarily by Janet's energy, enough to function normally and be out of pain at least, and seemingly didn't even face jail for her crimes. Which, honestly, yeah, she's been through enough already. She didn't want to hurt anyone, she just didn't want to hurt herself anymore. Hopefully that was the start of a redemption arc for her. Speaking of redemptions, closing out this category, we have a whopping 5 more entries. Electro, Green Goblin, Sandman, Dr. Octopus, and Lizard. When Doctor Strange's butchered spell brings these guys to Peter's dimension in Spider-Man No Way Home,
Hello, Peter.
they don't waste any time trying to take out their sorta kinda arch nemesis, but unbeknownst to them, this Peter Parker is an absolute angel who literally fought and robbed Doctor Strange to give them all a second chance at life. While this resulted in most of them losing their powers, for most of them, this was a blessing. Flint Marko will be able to have a normal relationship with his daughter, Kurt Connors won't be treated as a total freak anymore, and Otto Octavius will even be able to use his technology for good now that it isn't controlling his mind anymore. They were all neutralized by Spider-Man and sent back to their own worlds, and while the canon of that is really confusing when you think about it, we're just happy that they all got a chance to be healed and live better, happier lives.
There you go.
Now we move on to the villains who technically got punished for their crimes, but not as much as others. These are the non-lethal fates. Kicking off this category, we have to mention all the multiversal Deadpools from Deadpool and Wolverine. Since these guys were Deadpools, they were presumably able to regenerate from their bloody wounds at the hands of the titular duo.
How long does it take for you to regenerate? Regenerate?
We assume that they were sent back to their own worlds by the TVA, and on top of that, they all got to achieve every Deadpool's goal of meeting the one and only Peter Pool.
You guys know Peter?
Are you kidding me? Every Deadpool has a Peter.
Shit, Peter's a goddamn legend in every Deadpool's world.
Beating Shanked repeatedly sucks, but when you get to meet Peter, isn't that all worth it? Next up, we have Zeus, a secondary villain from Thor: Love and Thunder. This guy got killed by one of his own thunderbolts. At least you'd assume that if you didn't stay through the credits. We still have no idea how he survived, but he's recovering well enough to plan an attack on those pesky superheroes as revenge for stealing his spotlight. Good for him, I guess. Now we move on to the characters who faced legal punishment, starting Starting those off is the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming. He's honestly nowhere near as malicious as the other villains Tom Holland's Spidey has faced, but Vulture is still a force to be reckoned with. When Peter foiled his plan to get rich off the black market, he was webbed up and taken to jail, presumably serving some serious time for his numerous federal crimes. While his stay in prison won't exactly be pleasant, his crimes were definitely some of the least deplorable in this category. He was also able to protect his wife and daughter like he set out to, and respected Peter enough for saving Liz's life to refuse revealing his identity. Vulture at least has potential to be reformed, so we'll place him relatively low. Next up is Paradox from Deadpool and Wolverine. While Vulture was a black market criminal who pretty much knew he was screwed at a certain point, Paradox was a high-ranking, multiversal governmental agent who was placed behind bars for playing by his own rules and almost destroying multiple universes. There's no way this guy's seeing the outside of a top-security prison cell again, and honestly, that's for the best. He was willing to destroy entire universes for the sake of the sacred timeline. The fact that he was upset by Deadpool and Wolverine's survival alone makes us happy that he's no longer in a position of power. The whole numerous homicidal acts of treason thing is just the icing on the cake. He's not the most evil MCU villain, but he's definitely one of their biggest jerks. Things turned out even worse for Yon-Rogg from Captain Marvel. After his defeat at Carol's hands, Yon-Rogg was spared and sent back to Hala to tell the Supreme Intelligence that the debatable strongest Avenger was putting an end to the war.
The war, the lies, all of it.
We don't imagine that a mass-murdering dictator would be happy about one of their employees failing his mission, nor do we expect that she'd be sympathetic because Captain Marvel was strong enough to basically one-shot him. It seems like the absolute best scenario for old Yon-Rogg here is being enslaved to the Supreme Intelligence for as long as he lives. And since Captain Marvel off-screened that AI a-hole, even that is a pretty raw deal. Next we have the villain of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, the High Evolutionary. This guy's joining Namor in the club of villains who deserved way, way worse. The biggest difference here is the fact that even Namor had a somewhat sympathetic motive. The High Evolutionary was a genuine monster who did illegal, inhumane experiments on animals and children to eventually create a perfect society. While he received a severe beating from Rocket and the others, twice in fact,
Rocket, raccoon.
he was spared on account of Rocket having this neat little thing called a conscience. After having his plans foiled and his life's work blown up, he was saved from the explosion by Drax and thrown in prison, presumably forever. There are very few times when a life sentence feels like too small of a punishment, but this is definitely one of them. Next up is Abomination from the Incredible Hulk. This guy was just seconds away from being ripped in half by Hulk, but thankfully for him, Betty shouted out to stop Bruce from becoming a murderer of a monstrously mutated man who had already committed numerous unspeakable crimes himself, but whatever. After being arrested, he eventually somewhat reformed with Wong's supervision, but that was mostly in She-Hulk, which, look, I didn't watch it, you probably didn't either, statistically, whatever. Redeemed or not, he's still been absolutely mutilated beyond repair, which has to be a hard pill to swallow for anyone who was once human.
This is a mess. None of these storylines make any sense.
But the power trip he was on suggests it wasn't all unpleasant for him.
You got sucked into another show, didn't you?
Closing out this category is Baron Zemo. Right off the bat, Zemo's family was one of the many casualties of the Avengers' often reckless heroism.
I lost everyone.
Which is what kickstarted his grudge against them. At the end of the Civil War, he's placed in prison for presumably the rest of his life, but with a smug sense of satisfaction that, in his own twisted way, he kinda succeeded in his goal to discredit the Avengers. Weirdly enough, even if you take his escape and eventual rearrest in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, his fate is pretty much the same. Zemo at least had his life to hold on to, and that's more than we can say for the rest of the characters. These villains faced instantaneous deaths. Kicking off this category is Hela. In Thor Ragnarok, Odin decides that there's no better time or place in his actual deathbed to drop the bombshell that his sons have a long-imprisoned sister who's going to try and kill them and everyone they know.
It's not possible.
Darling, you have no idea what's possible.
Hela was ruthless and came ridiculously close to achieving her goal of ruling Asgard mercilessly. Thor, Loki, Hulk, and Valkyrie together weren't strong enough to stop her, so Thor had to make the tough decision to sacrifice his homeworld by allowing the event known as Ragnarok, the very prophecy he was desperately trying to stop throughout the movie, to come about. The monstrous Surtur was able to destroy Asgard and Hela along with it.
The people are safe. It's all that matters.
As powerful as Hela was, even she likely couldn't withstand an apocalypse strong enough to kill a realm of gods. That said, in the MCU, you really can't bet on a character's death until it's outright stated. It's unlikely, but Hela could have survived somehow, and even if she didn't, this was still probably a fairly instant death that didn't cause her a lot of pain. Still, you lose Hela. Who better to follow up that iconic line than Ivan Vanko, aka Whiplash from Iron Man 2. Neither this guy nor this movie are fan favorites in the MCU, but he at least made for a pretty memorable final battle.
Good to be back.
Iron Man and Rhodey had to fight what was basically Iron Man, bigger edition, with a whole army of robots alongside him to boot.
Fabulous, I love it. Hey, this is our guy. Didn't I tell you? I had a feeling.
But when Whiplash knew he was defeated, he chose to self-destruct in a last-ditch effort to take out his nemesis.
You lose.
Death by self-destruct is a pretty flashy way to go out, but it's also instantaneous and technically done on Vanko's own terms. Still, since the good guys managed to escape his grasp at the last moment, we have to call this one a net loss for Vanko. While he isn't human, which separates him from most of the villains so far, Ultron is definitely worth a mention. Bruce and Tony's attempts to create an AI capable of helping the Avengers protect the universe kind of backfired when Ultron decided, hey, what if I just killed you guys? Would that be okay?
There's only one path to peace. The Avengers' extinction.
That would not, in fact, be okay, and in the end, he'd meet his end at the hands of Vision. It's hard to not feel for even Ultron when he's so brutally, utterly beaten, but on the other hand, yeah, that was for Jarvis, you son of a bitch. I'm in the minority of people that actually enjoyed Multiverse of Madness, but if you're a big fan of Wanda, aka the Scarlet Witch, we can understand if this one's maybe your least favorite. Grief over Vision's death, not to mention those of her children, made Wanda go crazy, and the Darkhold only made things worse.
Everything I lost can be mine again.
She went crazy enough to completely dominate Kamartaj, blackmail Wong with his friends' lives to lead her to Mount Wundagore, and kill numerous people on her way to travel to the multiverse and find a world where she'd finally be happy. Sadly for her, all she succeeds in is driving herself further into a multiverse of madness.
What mouth?
Oh, I said it. And ultimately atones for her crimes by collapsing Mount Wundagore on herself, making sure that neither she nor anyone else will be held hostage by the Darkhold's powers. While this was a noble sacrifice on Wanda's part, she did technically avoid facing justice for all the people she had killed, and, like, you saw what she did to Black Bolt, right? She reaps what she sows. Now, this next one sounds worse than it actually is. The Mandarin Zhu Wenwu from Shang-Chi. Having your soul absorbed is one of those deaths that sounds so utterly brutal that it's hard to imagine a fate much worse. When you think of anything involving the soul, it's natural to think, say the line, Kifinosi, fate worse than death. For Wenwu, though, the Dwellers were creatures who ate souls, like for nourishment. When you eat a cookie, it's not still alive in your stomach, right? We're gonna assume souls work the same way. Plus, like Wanda, Wenwu was atoning for his mistakes, so we think this is the right place to rank him. Poor Whiplash looks lonely in the I killed myself with a self-destructing piece of equipment club. How about we have Crossbones join him? Crossbones was the first villain of Captain America Civil War, and being a pretty cut and dry terrorist, we can't say that we're shocked that he was equipped with an explosive vest in case things went awry. Crossbones didn't get to shine like a lot of fans wanted him to, but he did go out trying to kill his mortal enemy, with Cap only being saved by Wanda using her powers to move Crossbones out of the way at the last moment. On top of such a humiliating defeat, Wanda accidentally redirected him to a building full of people, taking innocent lives and ruining the Avengers' public relations in one fell swoop. Yeah, you guys, you really should have more training for stuff like this. Okay, this next one is an extremely minor villain, but we have to mention Linda from Black Panther. Linda was a scumbag, but even she didn't deserve to go out the way she did. When Claw held Linda hostage in an attempt to make Killmonger surrender, we found out that loyalty is just not in all Eric's vocabulary.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Eric.
It's gonna be okay.
He didn't waste any time killing a woman who thought he genuinely loved her, which, like, yeah, that was a bit naive, but it's still kind of sad. On the other hand, I don't think even the most skilled at mental gymnastics would shed a tear for Claw. Almost definitely a racist and actually definitely an illegal arms dealer and mass murderer, Claw was a scumbag through and through.
Baby, don't hurt me.
Getting shot by Killmonger was a mercy compared to how much time this guy could and should have served for his crimes, but dead is still dead, so we can't place him any lower. Now it's time for the evildoer viewers who didn't get off with all that instant death stuff. These are the painful demises. It's time to talk about our next Guardians of the Galaxy villain. The first one, Ronan the Accuser. The power of friendship is one of those tropes you either love or hate, and the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie had a pretty clever iteration of it. In order to keep Ronan from getting the Power Stone, Quill didn't waste any time grabbing onto it once it was freed from Ronan's hammer. The unaware semi-god was nearly destroyed by its power, and may well have been, if his new friends hadn't joined hands with him to share the burden, then annihilating Ronan with a delightfully shiny blast of energy. Shout out to unreasonably huge laser beams, gotta be one of my favorite villain destroyers. On the other hand, the mutinous Ravagers might have had to suffer for a bit longer before they were killed. When Rocket and Yondu escaped thanks to Groot's eventual help, the trio make their escape, with Yondu shanking all opposition with that telekinetic arrow thingy of his. Side note, Yondu from Marvel Rivals, anyone? It may have been mostly Yondu, but even Rocket and Groot joined in to get some payback on those Groot bullying sickos. When even Groot is pissed enough to help on your killing spree, that's how you know you screwed up. Now it's time to talk about the very first villain in the MCU, Obadiah Stane, aka Iron-Monger from Iron Man. Every masterpiece has a cheap copy, they say, but in this case, Iron-Monger wasn't a cheap copy. He was a terrifyingly quick improvement on Stark's early power suit. This was one of those weird moments where it just felt like the villain was absolutely throttling the hero. That was until Stane was electrocuted and blown up by the arc reactor in a fiery explosion. This is one of those cases where I guess we could have placed it in the instant death category, but come on. There was a huge explosion, one only made worse by Iron-Monger's own technology, which definitely would have made his death all the more certain. We'd be doing it a disservice if we didn't place it at least this low. Now it's time to talk about Mysterio, the second MCU villain who faced defeat at the hands of Spider-Man, and the best. In his final moments, Quentin Beck, like Iron-Monger, was killed by his own stolen tech, being shot in the stomach by one of his own drones. In a clever last-ditch effort to kill Spider-Man, he made an illusion of his wounded self, giving Peter his glasses back, but Peter was clever, disarming Mysterio and letting him meet his own doom.
You can't trick me anymore.
But not before Quentin framed him for killing such an absolute saint as Mysterio, revealing Spider-Man's identity and basically ruining his life.
Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker. What the?
Mysterio may have died, but Spidey definitely got the worst ending here in a lot of ways. Mysterio kinda won when you think about it, my man. But there's no line of thinking that makes Killmonger a winner in his story. Killmonger was a tragic tyrant, but a tyrant nonetheless. The guy literally burned the entirety of the heart-shaped herb that empowers Wakanda's kings just so nobody would ever surpass him.
All that challenge shit is over with. I'm the king now.
That's a level of paranoia I didn't even know existed. Killmonger knew darn well that after all he'd done, there was no way he was gonna be a free man again. So after being beaten by T'Challa in combat, he chose to live out his final moments watching the sun set.
It's beautiful.
His life was full of basically nothing but suffering, but at least he got a few moments of peace at the end. That makes him very enviable to members of our next section. They're the villains who met seriously gruesome ends. Have you heard the term flew too close to the sun? Well, Icarus decided that even that couldn't describe how badly he screwed up. It was one thing for Icarus to betray his centuries-long friends and family to make sure that Earth would be terraformed to Ereshkigal's liking, but even this guy had his limits. Well, limit. And that limit was Cersei. His love for her was so strong that even this maniac wasn't willing to kill her, and when he realized how badly he'd screwed over his family and his god, he literally flew into the sun. Unfortunately, Icarus is no Captain Marvel, so this would spell a very fiery doom for this fallen angel. So, I guess we're all just gonna pretend Sprite wasn't just as willing to kill all of them? Yeah? Okay then, freaking Eternals. Next up is one of the most revolting villains in the whole MCU, Dreykov from Black Widow. This guy literally makes his living by trafficking little girls and transforming them into straight-up killing machines.
But there is a pheromonal lock. Smelling my pheromones that prevents you from committing violence against me.
Heck, even his own daughter wasn't spared from this fate, but we'll get to her later. For now, just know that Dreykov is one of the most irredeemably evil villains we've seen in the MCU so far, so while he did die in a fiery helicopter explosion at the risk of sounding cruel, we honestly wish he got worse. There was not a single redeeming quality in this guy, to the point where his own daughter was relieved when he was confirmed as dead. If there's anyone who deserved to have a name as goofy as Taserface, it's Dreykov, but, well, Taserface is pretty close to pure evil as well. He's basically the leader of those treacherous Ravagers we mentioned earlier, and as a result, he deservedly got one of their most brutal deaths.
I'm sorry. Your name is
It's Taserface?
At first, Yondu managed to detonate some nearby explosives to wound his former ally. That'd be a pretty painful way to go. If he actually did go, that is. As luck would have it, Taserface survived long enough to make it to the ship's computer and essentially snitch on Yondu to the Sovereigns, allowing them to pursue him further.
Tell him the name of the man what sealed his fate. Taserface.
Taserface may have gotten a sweet taste of revenge near the end there, but since he got blown up twice before his actual death, we can't exactly say that evens things out for this guy. Deviant Crow from Eternals is up next. To his credit, he came close to using Athena's illness against her, and that's not to mention having already absorbed 2 of the Eternals' powers to use against her both physically and mentally, but in the end, his fate was being slashed to bits by Athena, and right when he was finished snacking on her essence. So close, yet so far. This isn't the most traditional entry on our list, but we had to mention the various Hydra agents from Captain America, the First Avenger, and the Winter Soldier. Cap was not holding back. Like, it was liberty and justice for all, or death, your choice. These guys got killed in a lot of bloody ways. Some were shot, others were crushed. One of them kind of went out the old Syndrome way and got minced up by some helicopter blades. It's like the old saying goes, it doesn't pay to be an international terrorist. I'm sure someone says that. Next up is #1 Glazer of the High Evolutionary, Thiel. Apparently, committing countless genocides and inhumane experiments on children and animals wasn't grounds for the Guardians to kill the High Evolutionary, but being his bootlicker is a different story. With Groot's help, wow, he's helping in more of these than I thought he would, Star-Lord decided to go on a quick skydiving trip with his new best friend, Thiel. Then he discovered that Thiel main Ridley in Smash Ultimate, so he decided to reenact his iconic side B move. What a nice guy. Nah, but seriously, that had to hurt. On top of that bloody demise, High Evolutionary is gonna have to hire a new assistant now. It's a cruel world indeed. Next up is Dar-Benn from the Marvels. She's one of the many antagonists who, to her credit, has some very legit reasons to be pissed off at her adversary. Captain Marvel needed to destroy the Supreme Intelligence, but in doing so, she accidentally destroyed the very essence of Dar-Benn's world, rendering Hala basically unlivable. One of these accidental forms of destruction was the loss of Hala's sun, which made stealing Earth's sun a completely reasonable decision to Dar-Benn.
The civil war has polluted our skies. My people cannot breathe. Our sun is dying.
But her ruthlessness would be her downfall. After equipping the 2 bands on her own, the power proved too much for her to bear, ripping her apart piece by piece. You know what the worst part is, though? Carol literally offered to fix Hala's son just to be nice, and it did so anyway right after Dar-Benn's death. She could have just waited a few hours and none of this would have had to happen. Now let's talk about Gorr, the God Butcher. Admittedly, this guy's one of the tougher characters to rank. On one hand, he was slowly killed for centuries by the Necro Sword after it called out to him, using its dark energy to manipulate him into killing numerous gods. This all happened because his god, Rapu, refused to heal his sick daughter, adding dead kid to the list of tragic motivations.
No, sorry. There's no eternal reward for you, dog!
On the other hand, well, he technically succeeded. Thor managed to talk him down from wishing for the death of all gods, instead wishing for what he wanted all along, the life of his daughter. He may have died a pretty brutal death, but at least Gorr managed to do what he set out to. It just took way longer than it should have. Deadpool and Wolverine is a cinematic masterpiece, or something like that, and it's in large part because of the deaths of these TVA agents. You know what I'm talking about. That scene right at the beginning where Bye 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 plays as Deadpool uses Wolverine's decaying corpse to shank numerous TVA agents in self-defense. Some highlights included impaling one through the skull, decapitating one of them, dancing while he does it, and even penetrating one of them by complete accident, though let's be real, he probably would have done it on purpose too. When Deadpool says he's sorry for killing you too painfully, you know, things have gotten a little too brutal. But who cares about those guys, right? Let's talk about an emotionally painful death, that of Loki. And Infinity War wasted no time ripping our hearts out. Loki had basically redeemed himself by this point. He helped Thor take down Malekith and Hela, and now he was using his skills of illusion and deception to try and trick Thanos. He tried to impale the Mad Titan through his chin, which, to be totally honest, I'm not sure why he thought that would work. I mean, have you seen that chin? I definitely wish it had, though. The consequence of his failure was Loki being brutally choked to death by Thanos, his brother watching and screaming as the breath slowly drained from his lungs. Love him or hate him, Loki deserved better at this point, but at least he earned that statue now, right? Closing out this category is the self-proclaimed Mandarin, Aldrich Killian from Iron Man 3. One of the many loose ends Tony Stark had from his douchier years, Killian was one of the inventors of Extremis, which, to simplify it, is basically nanotech steroids. Through his experiments, Killian undoubtedly killed a lot of people, including his own partner in crime, Maya, the moment she started to have reservations about his plans.
Half of this size, I'm dead.
It's times like this my temper is tested somewhat.
In the end, though, well, he might have wanted to keep his assistant around a little longer.
sorry.
After surviving a massive explosion thanks to his extremis transformation, Killian would immediately continue trying to get in Tony's head, to which Pepper would respond by revoking his breathing privileges, leading to Killian to wonder if maybe the power of human connection was important after all. Still, at least the suffering is over for him. These final few villains either died in the most inconceivably cruel ways imaginable, or they suffered something even worse. Either way, they have the fates worse than death. It may be a bit of a hot take, but we're placing Thanos first in this final category. Right off the bat, I just want to say, nothing would be too cruel for Thanos. This guy was an absolute monster in every sense of the word, and came ridiculously close to achieving his goal of a balanced world, only to die at the last second thanks to Tony's sacrifice. Thanos watched in horror as all of his allies, weapons, and horrors beyond our comprehension were turned to dust, knowing that he'd lived his entire life to achieve this goal, even going as far as to kill his own adopted daughter, whom he did love in his own twisted way. To get there,
I'm sorry, little one.
he had to watch the fruits of all his labor crumble in a matter of seconds, then accepting his fate before he followed suit. It was at this moment that the Mad Titan became the Sad Titan, to which I say, cry about it, bitch. Another villain pretty far down the morality spectrum is Quill's father, Ego. Ego is, well, he's a god. He's old enough to know about how the world was formed, to have traveled to numerous universes and mate with the local women to create an heir to help him spread across the universe like a plague. His life was basically like Thanos's, except instead of wanting to make the world less crowded, he wanted to make it more crowded with himself.
Everything is me.
No matter what Ego did, he never would have been satisfied. So, in a sense, planting a bomb in his brain that blew this narcissist to dust was almost an act of mercy. That said, huge emphasis on almost. All things considered, Taskmaster from Black Widow, aside from how they butchered the character, had a pretty happy ending. But the thing about happy endings is that they don't always cancel out really sad beginnings. First, she got blown up as collateral damage in an attack that didn't even kill her horrendous father, the actual target of the attack. Then she survived, but only because of her scummy dad, turning her into a cyborg and forcing her to unwillingly work as a murder slave. Like the other widows, she's free now, which is great, of course, but that doesn't mean that she isn't permanently disfigured and traumatized by what she went through. Still, at least she has a chance at a somewhat normal life thanks to Natasha. Next up is Darren Cross, aka MODOK.
I want my daddy!
I want your daddy too.
The villain of Ant-Man, the Mosquito, the Yellow Jacket, seemed like he was defeated when Ant-Man destroyed his suit and sent him to the quantum realm. Darren was separated from the world as he knew it, trapped in a terrifying and unfamiliar world, forced to forever cosplay as the villain from Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
Face to face.
That's a face. It's a big face.
Even when he got to lash out at the quantum realm, he was ultimately still just a lackey to Kang and couldn't even talk in his presence without being punished. In the end, he found some redemption by helping defeat Kang, but died shortly thereafter. While this wasn't a happy ending, it's about the only one left that has any bright side to it.
You always were a brother to me.
I was.
So we had to place it pretty high up, relatively speaking. Just outside of our top three, we have Cassandra Nova from Deadpool and Wolverine. Okay, sure, she liked the Void. She liked being able to use her powers with zero restraint to cause as much carnage as she pleased. That's great for her, but, like, think about it. This girl was literally banished to the Void as a baby. The TVA saw this mutant infant and literally banished her to the Shadow Realm so she wouldn't cause trouble. If her conversation with Wolverine has any indication, this did hurt her, as monstrous as she was. This was still a case of child abandonment that only made her fall even deeper down the hole of villainy.
I think we both know who lives in the garbage dump.
Her time in the Void gave Nova a serious god complex, and she ultimately tried to use the Time Ripper to destroy all universes except for the Void, making her the de facto ruler of the universe. She lived her life in exile, desperately clinging to control, and in the end, she was ripped apart atom by atom. As bad as that is, we have to give our bronze medal of brutality to Kang the Conqueror from Quantum Mania. On one hand, Kang is not coming back. He was sucked into his own multiversal power core, either dying brutally in the explosion or being exiled even further into the quantum realm, which frankly sounds like an even worse way to go. But like with Nova, just think about it. This guy has been exiled in the quantum realm for centuries, albeit deservedly so, and has been in a desperate power struggle to get out of the quantum realm so he can continue his reign of terror. His plans were foiled for the first time just when he was about to succeed, and as if that happening once weren't bad enough, it happened again when Ant-Man sabotaged his last-ditch escape attempt using his own ship's explosion to atomize him for good. Kang basically faced Thanos' fate twice. It's actually really hard to get worse than that.
This is wild.
But while all those characters had some pretty unspeakable ends, well, at least it did end for them. The silver medal of evil goes to the man doomed to guide others to a treasure he cannot possess, Red Skull. Like Captain America, Johann Schmidt was mutated by Erskine's serum, but instead of becoming a beloved all-American super soldier, he went from a psychotic Nazi to an even more psychotic Nazi, with superhuman strength to boot. His goal was to use the power of the Tesseract to take over the world, but we all know how touching an Infinity Stone is generally not a good idea. Touching the Tesseract would lead to Red Skull being disintegrated by its sheer power, or so you'd think. In actuality, Red Skull was transported to the planet Vormir, the place where another Infinity Stone was held, but when the Soul Stone rejected Red Skull because, well, look at him, he was forced to become its guardian until someone came along to grab it.
In order to take the stone, you must lose that which you love.
The only thing worse than being a cruel dictator with a god complex is being deprived of the one thing you want more than anything else, pure, unadulterated power. Red Skull could theoretically be free now, since the Soul Stone was claimed by Thanos and later by Hawkeye, but having to die in one of the most painful ways imaginable and be a slave to help others get the very thing you crave most, yet can never obtain, is easily the most brutal fate an MCU villain has gotten so far. Well, a main villain at least. We almost forgot about this guy, but when we remembered, it wasn't even a contest. The gold medal of brutality has to go to Kaecilius from the first Doctor Strange movie. Kaecilius is not just the most brutal death in the MCU, he had arguably the most tragic too. Like most of the Ancient One's students, Kaecilius was a broken man, deep in pain after losing everything.
So, you know.
Through her training, he gained immense power, but when even this wasn't enough for him to find peace from the pain of his losses, he resorted to making a deal with the devil, or Dormammu, if you want to get technical about it. By planning to unleash this malevolent god into their realm, Kaecilius and his cult of zealots hoped to achieve the eternal life of peace Dormammu had promised them. Unfortunately, despite the Ancient One's warnings, Kaecilius didn't realize that Dormammu's promise was too much for him to handle until it was too late.
Dormammu? I've come to bargain.
After Doctor Strange successfully blackmailed him into stopping his plans to invade Earth, Dormammu was pissed, but not too pissed to keep his promise to Kaecilius and the gang.
Pain's an old friend.
What a nice guy! He was even nice enough to give them eternal life as his slaves, the mindless ones, living in eternal torment with no semblance of humanity remaining. Yeah, that's hell. Kaecilius straight up went to hell. Like, it doesn't get worse than that. I guess he's at least not gonna have to worry about his dead wife anymore. That's good.